I was very upset about the notion that nearly half of doctors are considering leaving medicine. And we'll talk about the why of that with our guest, Seth Denson. He is the president and co-founder of GDP Advisors, which is, what kind of group is GDP Advisors, Mr. Denson?
Jim, good to be back with you.
Yes,
We're
sir.
a healthcare market analyst firm, and we represent employers who provide health care to their employees.
All right. Very good. Now then, with that in mind, that half of doctors are considering leaving medicine, I find that remarkable because, I mean, of all the time and the money that goes into this, I mean, this is a major commitment of your life. What would make doctors in such large numbers consider leaving medicine?
Well, medicine is no longer run by the medical practice any longer. It's run by big business. And the challenge that many doctors oftentimes find themselves in is that to stay afloat in today's business climate of medicine, they have to engage in a world that they really didn't sign on for. Most doctors wanted to treat patients, to do good, to help people in need, and they find themselves spending more time on the business side of healthcare than on actually delivering healthcare itself.
Well, that certainly does say a lot. All right, 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. I'm wondering about the number of doctors that seem to be following through on this. It's one thing to say, boy, I've had it with this job. It's something else to actually take steps to, I don't know, open a flower shop or something, whatever they're doing. How many of them are following through on this complaint?
Well, what we're not seeing a mass exodus of doctors. What we are seeing, though, and this is a concerning statistic, is that the growth rate of primary care physicians in the United States is not increasing at the rate of our population growth. And what I mean by that is, there are specialists, there are internists, there are primary care doctors, and what we're finding is more and more people going into medicine are doing so through a more specialized aspect of care rather than primary care. And they're doing that for a couple of key reasons, one of which is that it's very expensive to go to medical school. And on average, a primary care physician is on the low end of the compensated physicians in the workforce. And so with the massive amount of debt required to go into medical school and come out of medical school, we're seeing more and more doctors come out wanting to be more of a specialization practice, things like radiology or surgery or oncology. We're not seeing primary care doctors more in the field, and these are the people that are the gateway to our care. They're the people that we turn to help us navigate the healthcare system, and so that is a concerning trend. And so while we're not seeing numerous doctors leaving medicine, at least not right now, what we are seeing is fewer primary care doctors coming into the mix.
Yeah. Now, I have heard this discussed. Maybe it's not being done, but I've heard suggestions made that to get more primary care physicians, and yes, admittedly they are paid less, that we offer them all kinds of breaks, that they will move to, let's say, lesser served areas, that we will forgive a certain percentage of their medical school debt, this sort of thing. Have we tried economic incentives in that regard? And if so, has that worked?
I think that this is a trend that has begun, but it's really not being done enough that there's some reasonable results that can be gathered by it. It's not just the money, it's the quality of life as well. And then what I mean by that is I've got dear friends of mine who are primary care doctors, and they're working astronomical hours just to try to see their patients. And what the article that you're referencing, or the study that you referenced at the beginning of our segment here, is referring to is the fact that a lot of these doctors are just frustrated with the overall structure of the business side of things, and what insurance companies are what they think preventing them from doing when it comes to treating their patients in the way they see fit. And so between the insurance companies and the hospital systems, and I'll tell you that the hospital system is really driving the primary care market right now, but not in the way that we would want it to. In more metropolitan areas, we're seeing hospital systems buying up the primary care physician practices because that becomes their sales force. They can go to these doctors with this looming debt, help pay off that debt, but in turn they go to work for the hospital system as a primary care doctor, and in turn they become the sales force to refer patients inside of the hospital system for tests and procedures alike.
1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, 1-866-505-4626 on the Bohannon Show, as we talk with Seth Denson, the president and co-founder of GDP Advisors. We're looking at the impending doctor shortage in this country, and goodness knows we have enough problems in terms of medical care without a doctor shortage as well. 1-866-505-4626. Back in just a moment. 1-866-505-4626. Half of doctors are considering leaving medicine because of health insurance headaches, and nearly 9 in 10 doctors believe that barriers set by insurance plans have led to worsened conditions for patients in need of care. Gee whiz, let's talk some more about that with our guest, Seth Denson, the president and co-founder of GDP Advisors, and also with Ed, who calls in from Las Vegas tonight. Hello, Ed, and good evening.
Yes, hi. I drive down to Mexico for dental work and prescription drugs. I haven't needed any medical, but for minor procedures, I'd consider it. And I hear people go to India for hip replacement and this, that, and the other. What's the impact of globalism when it comes to medical care and people, going across borders for, the dental school here wanted $2,000 for a special crown, and in Mexico I only paid $420, and the guy was very adept. I mean, he said he did about 500 crowns a year, and the person at the dental school needs about 5 to graduate.
What does it cost to fly to and from India?
I don't know, but I mean, if it's a hip replacement, I think the cost of the deductible, I hear 20 to 30 grand for a hip replacement, all inclusive, and here it's $100 grand if they're paying out of pocket.
Well, all right, let's let our guest respond to Ed in Las Vegas. Those are interesting numbers, to say the least, Seth.
Well, Ed's on to something, and we're seeing more and more of this where people are taking matters into their own hands and going across borders to get care done. Matter of fact, Senator Rand Paul just went to Canada to get an eye procedure done just a few weeks back. So medical tourism is a thing. We are seeing it now adopted in the insurance market as well, not just on a whim of somebody wanting to go somewhere else. The challenge that people should always be aware of, and this is what we caution people all the time, is recognize that in certain parts of the world, the quality of care is not regulated in a way that it is in the United States, and you may be forfeiting certain protections. For example, if I go to Mexico to get a medical procedure done and I have complications as a result of that medical procedure once I'm back in the U.S., the insurance company here in the U.S. is no longer required to pay for any follow-up treatment because I went beyond the borders to seek care in the first place. And so this is a concern that most people aren't aware of, that if their care that they get, we'll say south of the border, and they come back into the U.S., you effectively null and voided, in many cases, your insurance policy's requirement to pay for any follow-up treatments you may need to receive.
Okay, the ins and outs and reading the fine print. All right. To Jean in Moultrie, Georgia, next on the Bohannon Show. Good evening, Jean.
Good evening. My comment is that we're seeing more and more PAs and nurse practitioners instead of the doctors in our rural areas.
And not just rural areas, too. I've seen that in larger urban areas, too.
Well, I was just curious if it seems like the insurance that we're paying is still the same amount for the nurse practitioner or the PA as it is for the medical doctor.
It does sometimes seem as though that we're not getting our money's worth, Seth.
Well, a lot of times when people are paying the high insurance premiums we want to see a doctor. We want to see somebody that did all those years of medical school. But I will tell you that I have been massively impressed in my dealings over the last 20 years with PAs, and we're seeing a growth in the PA population and nurse practitioner population. These are people who understand medicine very well. They're engaged at and sometimes even a higher level than a doctor is in patient care, and they're great folks, and they're doing great work. And so oftentimes, though, be aware that your insurance, while your copay may be the same behind the scenes, oftentimes what is being billed by the practitioner is much less, and that is reflected in insurance premium renewals. And so since insurance has just become the financier of healthcare, the lower cost that we seek care on the front end, the more we're doing positive things to keep our health insurance premiums down in the future.
All right. In other words, we have an inflated view of what our insurance / out-of-pocket dollar it can really buy, apparently.
That's exactly right.
All right. Judy in Paducah, Kentucky, next up. Good evening.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I have been a nurse for 35 years in a small rural community and have seen so many changes in the doctors, the way that the system is run. It started with the typical country doctor that did everything, delivered half the babies in town, did surgery, did everything, to the point now where they're getting so specialized that it seems like the system is crushing these new doctors. They're just absolutely crushing them. And the paperwork, it used to be you went to the doctor's office. The doctor looked at you, he made eye contact with you, he talked to you, he examined you.
Yeah.
Now he sits and he examines his computer and kind of looks up at you out of the corner of his eye every now and then.
Yeah.
And another thing, I've had the same doctor for the last 20 years because I feel like I've raised him since he was a pup. That was his first IV physician. I've known him since he was a ER registration clerk. And I was his first IV stick. I volunteered. Anyway, now he is my personal doctor. And however, if I go to the hospital, I can't have him because now everybody has hospitalists. So when I am my sickest and the doctor that knows me the best, I'm no longer able to see.
Before our guest responds to you, I want to ask a follow-up to that. In your background as a nurse, Judy,
yes.
We have expectations, of course, that doctors know all, see all, they have infinite wisdom, and then there are nurses who are way down, and they know more about wrapping a bandage than the rest of us. Now, that's obviously an exaggeration, but it's the view, I think, of more than a few people. In point of fact, sure. I think I think nurses get a lot of disrespect.
You're absolutely right. But I will tell you this. If you're going to go to see a specialist, if your doctor that you know and trust refers you to whoever, ask the nurses about him. Because the nurses will know whether he is indeed a good doctor or not.
All right. Assuming that they'll level with you, that's fair enough. Okay, Seth Denson, response to Judy, please.
Well, listen, I think Judy's on the right track. And the other aspect of this, and this is why we're seeing a shortage, I think, of primary care physicians, is that medicine is becoming much more complex. It's difficult for doctors just to stay on top of all of the information that is out there, the various drugs that are available and treatment regimens and alternatives and options, not to mention the fact that if you're in network with, let's say, Blue Cross Blue Shield or United Healthcare, you now have to tend with 40 different sub-networks that are part of that as well. And so there's a lot going on in a doctor's world, and we see the same thing. It used to, when I would see my primary care physician, I'd get 40 minutes with them during my annual physical, and as of late, it seems like you get about 7, which has actually propelled me to change primary care physicians as of late, because I've now found a doctor that doesn't work for a hospital system, because in that scenario, they have to see so many patients to hit their, we'll call them quotas, that they just can't spend the time they need to with patients any longer.
Yeah. All right. To what extent are the insurance companies creating the problem?
Well, insurance companies started creating the problem, half a century ago when they started introducing PPO networks. When the insurance company introduced PPO networks and we started driving people through steerage to doctors, the insurance company started making commitments that it just couldn't ultimately follow through on. And when the insurance market consolidated, and now you only have 1, 2, maybe 3 insurance carriers in any given region, PPO network steerage doesn't work as a negotiating tactic anymore. And so the insurance companies have created this problem and now are having to deal with the ultimate results, which is why they're getting more and more involved in, we'll call it restraining a doctor's ability to really treat a patient in the way that they want to, and putting a lot of red tape in its way to getting that care provided.
Mm-hmm. Are we talking about a situation in which you could take the existing players and make this better, or are we stuck with what we have, given who's dispensing health care and who's paying for health care?
Well, I'm the eternal optimist, Jim, and I'm hoping that we can turn the tide here, but it's not going to be without some change. We can't expect the system to stay the same and change at the same time. It doesn't work that way. And what we need to do is actually, I was a history major in college, and history does tend to repeat itself. Let's go back. Let's go back to the way things were before we got into this network world where everything was a network-based system via an insurance company, and get back to more indemnity-style structures. My auto insurance doesn't depict which mechanic I go to, and so why does my health insurance depict which doctor I can go to? We need to get back to where insurance is insurance and not a steerage mechanism any longer, and that's really what it was back in the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah. Let's start a call with Aaron in Longview, Texas. We may have to finish it past the break. Go ahead, Aaron.
Hey, Jimbo. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I wanted to ask your guest 2 questions, really. First, has he ever dealt with non-compete agreements among doctors? And second, has he ever seen hospitals or doctor's offices that charge you both a copay to see the doctor and a copay to use the facility that you saw the doctor in? To expand a little bit, I had a long-standing appointment I was waiting for to see a neurologist in my town that I ended up in the hospital for a week, and a different neurologist came into the hospital room, and they claimed me as their patient. And so when I tried to have my appointment that was long-standing, I was told, well, I'm sorry, you can't see that doctor.
No, we're going to have to pause at that point. Stay on the line. We'll come back, and we'll get an answer from our guest in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO. Seth Denson is president and co-founder of GDP Advisors, online at their name, gdpadvisors.com. And we're looking at a pending doctor shortage in this country and the impact of insurance in many cases on the medical care that we do get. And Aaron in Longview, Texas, had called in with thoughts, first about non-competes among doctors. How does that work, Seth?
Well, listen, non-compete rules apply just in Texas just as much as anywhere else. I'm in Texas, so I'm very familiar with corporate structures of non-competes. With regards to the way that Aaron was referring to them, I think that he was, again, I could have misunderstood, but was talking about impending doctors working with various hospitals in a non-competition sort of way. And we do see this sometimes where a doctor is contracted, we call, with one doctor has, we'll call them privileges in the medical world at one facility but not another, and that would not allow them to treat a patient at a certain facility, which led to, I believe, his second question, which was, seeing a different copay for the doctor and then for the facility. And this is becoming a very common practice, and I would caution your listeners to always ask questions once they enter the hospital, because oftentimes what we're seeing is a fairly common practice these days in the United States is that if I enter into a facility that I know is in network with my insurance company, that does not necessarily guarantee that the doctor that I see will be in network with my insurance company. And therefore, I could get a surprise bill a couple months down the road when I find out that, indeed, the doctor that I saw wasn't in network, even though the facility was, and there's a separate copay for that. And this is unfortunately becoming a very common practice of medicine throughout the United States.
All right. Did that answer most of your questions, Aaron?
Exactly. What's happening in my area is there's 3 neurologists. They all are independent. They don't work for the hospitals, but they work at the hospitals. And so what happens is they, amongst the 3 of themselves, made an agreement that they wouldn't steal patients from each other, which gives me as a patient no right to a second opinion. And I literally had to drive halfway across the state to Houston to find another doctor that could give me a second opinion because I could not see one locally because they refused to accept a patient once another doctor had seen them. And that's where my situation was. I had a 6-week wait to see one neurologist, and 5 weeks into my wait, I ended up in the hospital, and a different neurologist came into my hospital room and told me that she was now my doctor, and I could not go see the other doctor that I had been waiting 6 weeks to see.
It sounds to me like we're talking about an industry that is getting too cute by half, quite frankly, Seth, and I'm not a great believer in government regulation, but this is game playing of an inordinate level. It is if they are deliberately building a system designed to screw you over, at which point I don't care if government comes in. In fact, I'll cheer them on. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense that just doesn't need to be done. This is game playing, Seth.
You're absolutely right, and it's something we've been advocating for extensively. And in my upcoming book that's coming out, I have a whole chapter on the structure in which business has taken over the medicine in a way that precludes the consumer from being a good consumer. And I'm a free market capitalist, but unfortunately, the only way to break the back of this, we'll call it crony capitalistic structure, is for the government to step in and say, this is an unfair trade practice, and we're no longer going to allow it. We do it with banks. We do it with credit card companies. We do it with pretty much every other industry, but the government has left healthcare alone in the way that it operates from a consumer standpoint.
All right, 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 on the Bohannon Show, and thank you for your call, Aaron, as we go to William in Tyler, Texas. Hello, William.
Hello. I noticed that a lot of these doctors working for these hospitals now, that they seem like they're pushed to give CAT scans, MRIs, CKGs, and things like that. Extra expense that a lot of times they don't even need. And if you tell them no, a lot of times they give it anyway. And then when you go to pay bills, say, I don't need to pay that because they didn't order it, and I told them not to do it.
To what extent is that simply butt cover, Seth Denson? You can't hang me for malpractice. Look, the guy came in with a hangnail. I gave him a CAT scan.
Well, that's definitely the veil that they hide behind. We're seeing more and more physicians hide behind the idea of covering their rear, so to speak, and not wanting to get sued. But the reality is the more tests that they generate, the more that they make. And I mentioned earlier that the vast majority of primary care physicians throughout the United States are now hospital-owned. Matter of fact, a recent study showed that a hospital's return on investment is 8-to-1 when they buy a physician's practice. And that's because once they purchase that physician's practice and that physician becomes an employee of that hospital system, they are really required by way of how they are compensated to send people to we call it the third floor to get that MRI and CT scan and lab and x-ray and all these extra tests, because that's what their new job is as a salesperson in the medical field.
1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, 1-866-505-4626. Back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show, 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. As we talk with our guest in this portion of the program, Seth Denson, the president and co-founder of GDP Advisors, and we talk about the way medicine and the payment of medicine and the distribution of medicine and the availability of medicine is happening in this country right now. What would you do if you could change the system and your word was law?
Well, the first step that I would take would require from a regulatory basis that there be full transparency within the system. That is absolutely a key requirement. Our free market system, it's easy to kind of look at the system and say the government's got to step in and change it. And there's a lot of talk these days about Medicare for all. And I caution people that scream for that because the United States is responsible for 70% of the advancement of medicine in the world. If not for our capitalistic system, we may have never cured things like polio, right? So we need our free market system for medicine to continue to flourish. But our free market system works best when the consumer has the ability to be an educated and informed consumer, and right now that just isn't happening in the United States. It's not regulated. It's not required. The consumer needs absolute transparency and understanding how business works in the healthcare system so that we can make more informed decisions. And while there's a whole slew of things that need to happen, that is the utmost of importance.
All right, to Dakota, who calls in from Denton, Texas on the Bohannon Show this evening. Hello, Dakota.
Hi, Jim. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
My question's actually for Seth. I called into this program maybe a week or two ago when we were talking about the VA hospital. And, I hear you talking about the doctors are hiding behind, sort of a CYA sort of standpoint of, they're covering their own back just to make sure by doing these extra tests and charging for these tests that you may or may not need. And,
yeah, but sometimes, let's face it, if that'll get you out of a lawsuit that could bankrupt your whole practice, it's not as though I necessarily blame the doctors for that, Dakota.
Of course. Right, of course. That makes sense. But my question to you is, you just mentioned the transparency with the public. But other than a knowledge on the public's end of what to expect and what to know when going to a doctor, what's the solution to the problem? What's the solution to this sort of, I don't want to say malpractice, but running tests that don't necessarily need to be run?
Yeah, so there's a couple of key things, and one, that's a great question, Dakota, and I'm waving to you from where I live in McKinney, so just down the road from where you are in Denton.
I was just there today.
There's a couple of key things. One is that in the United States, we operate on a fee-for-service basis. So, Jim, you asked me a moment ago if my word was law and what could I do. Transparency would be number one. Number two would be remove the fee-for-service structure by which medicine operates in the United States.
So we should go to an all-concierge service?
Well, no. What I'm saying is that patients should be billed for outcomes, not tests. So what I mean by that is the hospital system, the medical practice, gets to bill you regardless of whether or not they cure you, regardless of whether or not they ever figure out what's going on. And so there's an incentive there for more tests to be run. And so what we need to move away from is this fee-for-service model where every test generates a new bill and move instead into any final diagnosis generates a bill. And that's in large part the way the Medicare system operates, and this is a positive of the Medicare system, is that the system will oftentimes reimburse based on outcomes as opposed to tests and research and treatments. It's all about what the end result is. And we need to move more into that. I don't pay an airline company to get me on the plane. I pay the airline company to get me to my destination. And we need medicine to work in the same way.
All right. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. At a time when there's a growing population, and in particular a growing elderly population as the baby boom passes into retirement years, we're going to need healthcare professionals more than ever. If, in fact, at the same time we are facing, we'd be facing a doctor shortage anyway. If doctors are leaving medicine, then we're going to be facing a much larger shortage. It would seem that, quite frankly, supply and demand would kick in, and doctors already get paid a lot, but my goodness, if in fact we're going to see doctors leaving their practice at a time when boomers are all getting old, doctors will be able to name their price. I mean, I'll put it this way, I don't know how much guff I would put up with for, let's say, $150,000 a year, but for $750,000, I might put up with a whole lot more.
Yeah, no doubt, right? And this does bring up a bigger topic, though, that needs to be part of the conversation is, we shouldn't we shouldn't have a system where it costs nearly $500,000 to become so educated to become a doctor. We need to work through some ways in which some qualified people can get into the practice that maybe today can't afford to do it. Now, I'm not advocating a system where everything is paid for and free education. What I am advocating for, though, is that we look at the entire puzzle and figure out all of the various pieces that might come into play to drive the cost of healthcare down, but that in turn means driving down the cost to get into healthcare as well.
How do you do that? I mean, I know that healthcare inflation is much higher than average, and I know that educational inflation is much higher than average, short of just absolute price fixing and just laws that say you can charge only X amount to go to medical school, and then maybe some kind of subsidies to provide medical school with what they need to get the appropriate instructors and the like and the appropriate equipment. I don't know how you do this without totally distorting the economic model. I mean, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't know how you go about doing it.
Well, it definitely isn't without its challenges, and it's not going to be without some, we'll call it the big R, right, the regulatory word that us free market capitalists don't always like. But it is necessary to create a system that feeds the healthcare system appropriately. I'm all for people making money. I'm all for a capitalistic structure and system. But we need to put some reins on how the healthcare system operates, because it's not like buying goods and services or buying a car. This is my health, and this is the population's health. And so when you start to infuse that with various options of subsidies for doctors that do grades and things, I mean, there's a much longer conversation to be had about allowing more people to get into medicine at a lower cost way to do it, and allowing the overall cost of medicine to go down by regulating in some ways how the system operates.
Fair enough. More to come. 1-866-50-JIMBO. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, as we talk about something that we've been talking about as long as I've been doing talk on this network. Even before there was the proposal for Hillary Care, we've been talking about this. This is an issue that's been discussed going back certainly as far as Harry Truman and Franklin Roosevelt. So we're talking fractions of a century here. Mike in Gainesville, Georgia, a listener to WDUN Radio in Gainesville, and Bill and Joel. Hello, Mike, and welcome.
Yes, how are y'all doing tonight?
Fine, thank you.
I just had a little quick bit of info that I had pulled up off of watching some YouTube videos. They were bringing some news broadcasts that they had seen that most people don't see on the regular news. And they was talking about on getting doctors able to get their education a bit cheaper and help the healthcare system, where they was going to reduce the schooling from 4 years to 3 years for the doctors. And at the finish of the schooling, the doctor would be required to serve, say, a 4-year period or amount of years, say, in a smaller town or out in the country or something, until they, I guess, earned their, awards. And it sounded like a good idea to me. It's a step in the right direction anyway.
Yeah, there have been similar proposals that I've heard. Yeah, let's let our guest comment about that. Again, we mentioned that a little earlier, but it certainly would seem like a great idea. We'll forgive part of your debt. Now go work in a town where doctors don't want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, these types of programs make perfect sense. The question is forgiving the debt. Somebody still has to pay the debt, right? And so who's actually forgiving the debt? Is it Uncle Sam?
The
is it
taxpayer,
the
probably. The taxpayer in some form or another.
That's exactly right. And so, again, this is all part of a much longer conversation, but I'll tell you who your competition is in this. It's the hospital system who's saying, hey, we'll forgive your debt because we'll pay your debt so long as you come to work for us. And that's not the answer. That's not what we want to see happen. And so we really want that independent primary care doctor to continue to thrive and flourish. And there's a lot of there's a deep conversation needs to be had around this. I love this idea of going into more rural areas, or even more, we'll call them less attractive areas for doctors to go and serve their communities that are underserved. And so we're also seeing this in Doctors Without Borders and the Peace Corps and some other things as well. All these are great ideas, and I'd love to see more of them happen.
Yeah. All right. Good points, Mike, and we appreciate your call and your listenership as we go to Cody in Akron, Ohio. Hi.
Hi. I don't have a pointed question, and it might sound off topic to bring this up, but I just wanted to hear the commentary that you and your guest might actually talk about, where we have a situation with the wall declared a national emergency with people flooding over the border, and how that might relate to future presidents saying we have a national emergency of a shortage of doctors, and the free market system and the regulatory stuff and all that.
Right. Okay. Well, we've heard this before. I mean, I suppose that we could try to make that sort of respond to the general topic matter. Is this what you would call an emergency situation if you were president of the United States, Seth?
I don't know that we're in an emergency situation from a loss of doctors yet, but we're headed that direction. We are at a full tilt state when it comes to healthcare, though. Healthcare in general is expensive. Healthcare in general is complex, and it's administratively a hassle, which is, as the study that we've referred to multiple times this evening, is talking about. Doctors are done. They just don't want to deal with it anymore. That is a state of emergency that we are in the United States. We need to cure the healthcare system, but we need to do it in a way that isn't involving a government takeover. Nobody wants to go to the post office to see their doctor, and they don't want Amtrak to get them there, right? We need a free market system that continues to advance its healthcare. We need the government, though, to set specific parameters and structure around that allows the free market system to continue to thrive, where the consumer has the power, which it does not today, and that the system operates in a free trade commerce structure that right now is not present in our healthcare system.
About 30 seconds to go. Are there any examples anywhere in the world that point in that direction, in your view?
Unfortunately, there's not any specific examples, although we are seeing Germany has some things that they're doing around healthcare, around how they've structured a private pay around public option system. There's some things to learn from that. The benefit that the rest of the world has, though, is that the free market system in the U.S. is continually thriving, and they have the luxury of having socialized medicine because we don't. So as long as we have a free market system, and we need it, that needs to continue.
All right, stay on the line. We'll speak off air. Again, Seth Denson is president and co-founder of GDPadvisors.com, and we're looking at an impending shortage of doctors. This is Westwood One.